Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a series that aims to promote hope, healing, and the mercy of God, and one that will help you understand and then live this great mercy. As you can tell, I'm a little under the weather today, but I have such an important guest on. She's got such a valuable resume. When I read it, I thought, man, I got to get to work. She's Janet Morana of Priests for Life. She's the executive director there. She's works with Father Pavone in many areas and is seen on the EWTN series, Defending Life. She has several degrees and currently, as I said, is executive director of Priests for Life. She's traveled extensively. What I thought was really a wonderful award in 2009, she was awarded the Cardinal John O'Connor Pro-Life Hall of Fame Award. And that's something to be near and dear to your heart and very proud of. She's written several books. Today, I want to kind of focus on one called Shockwaves, Abortion's Wider Circle of Victims. And the reason that kind of piqued my interest was because I have a very dear friend who a couple years ago told me that his parents finally told him that they had aborted his brother years ago and how it has impacted him. And so I just asked Janet Morana to come on today and kind of walk us through all of these, so many things to talk about in abortion. There's so many victims, so many problems, some medical, psychosocial, emotional, spiritual, psychological issues. But let's just start at the beginning. How did you first get involved in the pro-life movement? If I remember, Father Pavone at a mass in Manhattan.
Well, no, actually, it began by Cardinal O'Connor when he ordained Father Pavone on November 12th, 1988. His first assignment was my parish in Staten Island, New York, St. Charles. And so this young priest came marching into my parish. And at the time, I really wasn't going to church. My mother-in-law was taking my daughters to church for me. I had been away from the church for about 20 years. But at the time, I was trying to get a job working with the New York City Board of Ed, and they really weren't hiring. So my mother-in-law started a novena. And 2 days before Christmas that year, I got called to a school I never, ever substitute taught in. And they hired me to start January 2nd to take over for a teacher who had to take emergency medical leave. So, of course, my mother-in-law, being the devout daily communicant she was, she goes, well, Janet, now you better go to church and light a candle at Thanksgiving. So I did. And then I said, all right, I don't want to thwart God. So it's Christmas too, okay, I'll go to church with the girls. But I really wasn't going to receive communion because I wouldn't go to confession. That was the kind of thing that made me go away from the church, that repetitive confession stuff, And so I was sitting there like I was watching a movie, going to church, just appeasing God, so to speak. Well, about a month into doing this, after one mass in the evening, Father Pavone was a celebrant, and you know how the priests outside of church are shaking hands and all that. Well, my little daughter, Tara, she was only about 8 years old at the time. She's pulling me, mommy, come, I want you to meet Father Frank. Father Frank, come here, meet my mom, the one who needs to go to confession. And of course, I turned to be red. I was embarrassed. And Father's confessional was like right there, nearby. And I was horrified. But he was real cool. He wrote the number of the rectory on a piece of paper and said, here, just give me a call. He said, Tia, Mom doesn't have to go to confession just let her give me a call. So I took that piece of paper, shoved it in my purse, and stayed there for about another month. And then I decided to call that priest and say, let me see what he has to say. And so he had me come and meet with him at the rectory. And I learned, Brian, a word that I had never heard in all of my Catholic school education: spiritual direction. I didn't know what that was, and he said, well, tell me just, Janet, briefly, what is your problem? I said, well, I went away to the church because I didn't believe in confession anymore. And I talked to Jesus myself and this and that. And I said, oh, that's fine, Father. I disagree with some of the church's teachings. I said, like, for example, if women want to take birth control pills, they should be able to do that. And I said, and I don't believe in the infallibility of the Pope. Now, I thought this priest was going to jump at my throat, right, Brian? But no, Father was poker face, very cool. He says, well, Janet, you're a very intelligent woman. Maybe you need to know more about these things. Are you willing to study and read? And I said, sure. he started inviting me to his Friday evening Bible class. I would go after Bible class for a half-hour spiritual direction. It took me 3 months to argue through all my jazz. And then finally, I went to confession. But the whole point of this is, Father Frank, as my parish priest, we used to kid around and say, are we going to hear the A word this Sunday, meaning abortion? And I had no clue at that time about abortion, really. It just skipped over me. I was never for it, but it just wasn't even on my radar screen. Well, when he opened my eyes to what was happening to women and babies and abortion, I was like, I got to help Father, you do something about this. So I started helping Father Pavone locally in the parish, and we did all kinds of pro-life activities. You know, we did life chains. We prayed outside. We had no freestanding clinics on Staten Island where we were from, but we knew the doctors who were doing abortions in their office for, first trimester. So we started picketing outside of doctors' offices. We put up the first pro-life billboards on Staten Island. And of course, and I got my teaching job, and I was teaching public school. And then in 1993, Cardinal O'Connor gave Father Pavone permission to be the first full-time National Director of Priests for Life. And I thought, oh, bye, Father. I guess I won't see you that much anymore. Oh, no. He started calling me, and I volunteered. And I remained a volunteer for Priests for Life, doing a lot. My basement in Staten Island was our first resource department. And I just became more and more involved in the pro-life movement, helping Father. And what was simply happened, Brian, was I was doing more and more for my school, winning grants and doing, and so I came to a point where I said, I can't do both of these things. Right. Something has to give. So in June of 2000, Father Pavone said, well, we can hire you full time now, Janet, because, we were growing as a ministry. And I said, well, that's it. I'm leaving teaching. So on June 28th, 2000, I walked away from being a full-time public school teacher and stepped into being the executive director of Priests for Life, and an iron door closed behind me, Brian, and I'm never going back. Yeah. I just became so committed to watching, seeing women going into these abortion clinics. They weren't going over getting their freedom of choice. Eyes cast down. And I saw even fathers strong-arming a daughter, dragging them in. I mean, I saw all kinds of scenarios that I said, no, this has got to stop. This has got to stop. And so that's kind of how I became so passionately pro-life, from being a kid who went away from the church for 20 years. Well, I'm back more than 20 and I'm not going anywhere. Okay. This is a little bit long answer than what you thought, but I think it's interesting to see how the Holy Spirit, Father Frank explained to me that, Janet, God's grace was always there for you. You just were not paying attention to the signs of the Holy Spirit. Well, it took my mother-in-law praying me back in, into the church, that did it. It's like I got banged on the head big time, but I don't regret it for a moment.
As you mentioned, you've seen it all. And in your book, I thought you did a real nice, easy to read job of discussing the stages of development of the embryo and the tiny human being in the developmental stages. But you also have a lot of stories personal. Many people think abortion is just a private matter, and there may be one or two side effects, but it's a lot more than that. And can you share with us some of the stories that you've seen, or the things you write about in the book of real life?
Well, Brian, the concept of the book is, like you're saying, at the epicenter of every abortion is the death of that unborn child. So in the book, I do describe that unborn child that we see now. I mean, when Roe v. Wade was happened in 73, we didn't have sonography was, coming around. It was being used in medical practice, but not on an average doctor. Did not have an ultrasound machine. It was just brand new technology. And so, even the justices said in the decision, oh, we're not going to get into when life begins and all that, and the baby, we don't really know, blah, blah. Scientists don't even agree right now. There was all this talk that even scientists don't agree, which of course is wrong. But so what I do is I introduce the people to that baby, and show how in the first few weeks, how developed that child is, and so the concept is, at the epicenter, that baby dies in every abortion. And then the shock wave reverberates out. So obviously it affects the mom, but it affects the dad, but it also affects the grandparents, future siblings, and then, friends. Friends don't let friends drive drunk. Well, friends shouldn't take a friend for an abortion. And if you either give a roommate, because Brian, like in some college campuses, you hear of all the roommates on one dorm floor all chipping in to help some girl get an abortion. Well, you're all complicit in the death of that baby. And you may not realize it at that time, but eventually this stuff comes back to haunt people. And that's what we're finding, that abortion really affects everybody. And that's the concept of the shockwaves, that all of society has been impacted by the death of those babies.
I may not have mentioned about your involvement with the Silent No More Awareness campaign as co-founder, but were you really getting women and men and people to come out of the closet, so to speak, and share their stories?
Right.
What are some of the psychological, social, emotional, spiritual, on and on it goes? Stories that you've seen?
Well, first of all, the Silent No More Awareness campaign, I co-founded it with Georgette Forney from Anglicans for Life. We held our very first events in January of 2003. And back then, we sought women through the healing programs that were already in place, like Rachel's Vineyard, who felt, kind of like in a safe place to share their testimony. And these women stood at events, especially in front of the Supreme Court, with signs that say, "I regret my abortion." And then they began to tell, in like a few minutes, their story, why they had their abortion, what happened at the abortion clinic, and how they felt immediately following and later effects. So first of all, why they had their abortion? Well, most people think women have abortion because it's getting this big freedom of choice. But if you listen to their stories, and by the way, if people want to read testimonies, just go to abortiontestimony.com. We have the largest search engine there. You can click off. You want to read first trimester abortions, click that. Late term, click that. You want rape and incest testimonies, click that. We have them all cataloged up there that you can read these testimonies. But there's common threads. Many things happen like this. For example, some women and young girls have abortions, especially the young girls, because a parent is going to throw them out of the house if they don't have the abortion. Schools are complicit. I can introduce you to people who were told you're going to lose your scholarship unless you have an abortion. We have school counselors who take young girls off for abortions without their parents even knowing. Now, you can't give an aspirin to a kid who's got a headache in high school. Oh, but you can take them off to get an abortion. You see what I'm saying? So this is not. I can introduce you also to some women who are told by their husband, we already have 3 children. We can't afford anymore. If you don't have that abortion, I'm leaving you. I'm out of here. Oh, so now what does that mother have? Oh, a headache. Like, he's the breadwinner. I'm not working. I'm home taking care of my kids. I'm pregnant with baby number 4 and he's going to bail on us. I guess I have to have this abortion. You see what I'm saying? So the picture I'm painting is, are there some women who think they really want this abortion? If you read all those testimonies, that number is, I would say, less than 10%. The other 90+% have all these other influencing factors that have basically pushed them into the abortion. Because let's face it, if a girl, let's say, is pregnant, even college, right? Tells her boyfriend, hey, guess what? I'm pregnant. Stop there. His reaction at that moment is either pushing her to the abortion or not. And most guys will say this, well, I don't know, whatever you want to do, as if there's a choice. If that man at that point, that boyfriend says, honey, I guess we weren't planning to have a baby right now, but this is our child. I'll stand by you. We'll get through this together. The amount of men that say that is this compared to the amount of the guys who will say, oh, you got to take care of that. Here's the money. Go take care of that. I mean, a lot of these guys don't even take them for the abortion. They'll give them the money. And many times, so what happens is she goes and has the abortion and now she's traumatized. And guess what happens, Brian? And a few months later, the relationship, by and far, they break up. Yeah. So, it's very complex, but I would say 90% of the women, if you read the testimonies, the amount that were really pro-choice and said abortion was the best thing at the time, and then of course they learned to regret it later, but 90% of them are being forced or coerced by another influencer in their lives into that abortion clinic,
Put in a corner.
Yeah. They're not proudly walking in there for their freedom of choice.
Right.
And then, of course, in the abortion clinic, one of the things I think I do this in Recall Abortion. I get them, sometimes my brain gets confused. But what I did was I compared the stories of what happened to the women in an abortion clinic from the time they walked in the door, Planned Parenthood and all the rest, to, in New York, we used to call this ambulatory surgery, or, the kind of surgery that you go in and out same day, right? And I compared the two, and they're light years apart. Because if you go for just some sort of medical procedure that you're going to be in the hospital in and out same day, what happens? First of all, you've gone to your doctor weeks before with whatever the problem is. He's indicated you need surgery. He sets a date. Several days before that surgery, you go to the hospital for what? Pre-admission testing, right? True? And usually they do a chest x-ray, blood, urine. You meet with an anesthesiologist. They go over the kind of anesthesia they're going to use, et cetera, right? And then, of course, the day of surgery, someone has to bring you for the surgery, right? Someone has to take you home. And when you leave, first of all, you see the doctor after the procedure. He tells you how the surgery went. You usually get a script for antibiotics and pain meds, and you're going to follow up appointments, right? That's in and out surgery, right? None of that happens in an abortion. And you can read the stories of the women. When they show up at the abortion clinic, all they want to know is if it's a Medicaid, cash, or credit card. Boom. That's it. 3 questions. There's no medical intake form that they fill out like you do when you first time you go to a doctor. There's no medical intake. Next thing you know, they're back in a room and they're asked to undress. They're given usually a pill to kind of calm them down a little bit. And the first time they see that doctor, and this is over and over again in the stories, is when they're on the table, feet in stirrups, and they're ready to start the procedure. Yeah. And then when the procedure is over, they never, ever, ever see that doctor ever again. Some assistant comes, gets and wheels them into another room, or they call it the recovery room, but it's really a bunch of lounge chairs set up, and they give them some juice and cookies. And in about an hour, they tell them to get dressed and leave. No follow-up appointment. And if they have any complications from that abortion, and they call that abortion clinic, the clinic tells them go to the emergency room. Right. I mean, I have actually been one time, I was with a family member in a hospital in New Jersey, a big Robert Wood Johnson, that's a big hospital, right, in New Jersey. And we were in the ER, and in the cubicle right next to me, there's just a curtain separating us, was this young Hispanic woman. And you could hear everything was going on. She apparently went to have an abortion earlier that day in an abortion clinic not far from this hospital. And she had complications. So they told her, of course, go to the ER. In comes the medical person and says, well, now we're going to send you up. We're going to have to do an ultrasound right away. We're going to have to do some tests. But we need you to sign some forms here because we might have to rush you into surgery based on what we see. And it seems part of the fetus is still inside you. It was not a complete abortion. And it looks like you might have a perforated uterus. So she had to sign for all this. And they might have nicked your bowel too. So she had to sign I don't know what happened to her, Brian, but she had to sign for a possible hysterectomy and a colostomy and like all this stuff. Because once they got inside of her, they didn't know what they were going to find. So I wonder, like, how come I got to hear that? Is because that's just one of many, many women who suffered physical damage to them after abortion. And again, you can read the testimonies. I mean, I can introduce you to some women that the only child they were ever able to conceive was the child they aborted because of physical damage to them from that abortion. Yeah. So this is not just a little safe, simple procedure, like Bill Clinton said, safe, legal, and rare. Okay. It's not safe, even though it is legal, and it's not rare. I mean, as you know, it's the most common surgical procedure here in America.
While you were speaking, I was thinking of our 14-year-old daughter, who, as you said, she's going to be entering high school, and they can't give her a Tylenol at the school.
No.
You could go out and get an abortion or get the morning after pill.
Oh, yeah.
And abortion has lessened the male responsibility, as you discussed, because the guy just goes, well, just go have your abortion, and he's
Yeah,
out.
I'm out of here. I'm
Yeah,
out of here.
yeah.
Yeah.
And as far as
Yeah. There is a small percentage though of men who they also have no rights. Okay. So there's a small percentage here. Most of them just want to walk away and say, here's the money, take care of it, honey. But there is a small percentage that want them to have that baby, but they have no rights. So I can introduce you to men who are grieving. They could not save the life of their own child, and they had zero rights in this. So either way you slice it, it's big. It's big.
you mentioned in your book how in 1965 the definition of a pregnancy was changed. Could you share with us about that and how that they were able to talk about the Plan B pills and they weren't abortifacients?
Yeah, well, God bless the the American Coalition of OBGYNs, because first of all, they take a pro-abortion position. Okay. There is a pro-life group of OBGYNs, but the regular American gynecological and obstetrician group, they take a very pro-abortion position. So back in the 60s is when this began to shift. This whole, do no harm and all that stuff started to go out the window. And so they used to say that life would begin at conception, but some of these doctors preferred to say from implantation, which happens several days later, when the little embryo makes its way down, and implants in the uterus. And so it started to really get fuzzy, and they started talking about contraception as like, of conception as a process, like, this process that happens over these days, So you could see there was this drift starting to happen. And they will not talk about the fact that birth control pills are an abortifacient. Like they don't even refer to those things at all. So you could see, like, it was about 1965 when the slippery slope began to start. You understand, where they were like changing their opinions, and you could definitely see, I would say, of course, Dr. Bernard Nathanson and all those guys, they were looking for a way, to make abortion legal. Right. And so it was really kind of taking over in a way the OBGYNs and getting them to think differently. I'll never forget my own OBGYN, and then later his nephew became my daughter's OBGYN. And he talked about when he was in medical school at this time, and in the early 70s, like right after Roe v. Wade, this young doctor, he was in medical school. And he said that they were going to force them all to have to participate in abortion. And he went to his Uncle Lou, who was already an OBGYN, and said, Uncle Lou, we don't do this, right? And Uncle Lou said, no way. He says, well, I can't do this. He had to change medical schools. Really? In order not to be forced to participate or observe or learn how to do an abortion. So you see the forces that wanted to legalize abortion and just spread it through our country, they were very calculating. They got into the medical schools, they got into these medical associations, and they began to change the thinking all the way back in 1965. And if you notice, it was 3 years later that St. Paul VI came out with Humana Vitae, right? So there was all this stuff in the culture going on to lead us to abortion. And that's really what Paul VI said. He said that contraception would lead to abortion. And he said that all the way back in 1968 in the encyclical, and that's exactly what happened, right?
The interesting thing too is they had to have known that pills were in the works or that were going to prevent implantation.
Right.
So they changed the definition. And
right.
Words are so important, but when the sperm meets the egg and forms the zygote, it starts dividing, and the genetic material's all there.
All the DNA needed to create you is there at that split second. Boom.
And then to say that it's not a viable or a human being at that point in time, but it has to be implanted in the uterus, that's just its home. That has nothing to do with the fact it's dividing and replicating in this massive turnover of cells. And so they changed the rules. It's like, boy, you guys are one
You
step
can
ahead.
see it was all a plot to change the rules. It was all a plot to bring about contraception, abortion, and look where we are now. Oh, you know, with the chemical abortion now, because see, they can't get enough doctors to do first trimester, you know, surgical abortions. So now, as you know, the RU 486, they call it medical abortion. You know, no, wait, medical, you know, they try to, you know, soften it all. But we're finding out the women who participate in an RU 486 abortion are more traumatized than the ones who have surgical abortions.
Really?
Yes. For the following reason. Okay, they go to the Planned Parenthood and they get the first dose of the pill there. They take it in front of you know, an assistant, a nurse. It doesn't even have to be a doctor. It's crazy. With no medical intake, again, information. They take the first pill and they gave them the second dose in a little bag they take home with them, and they have to take it 2 to 3 days later. So now who's responsible for the death of the baby? They are. Directly. There's no doctor to blame. See, women who have surgical abortions, they'll picture in their mind that doctor and they could point to him and in their minds psychologically and blame him. They ingested the pill. And where's the abortion clinic? It's their bedroom and bathroom where they're expelling that baby, and now they're seeing that it's not a clump of tissues. Within that bloody mass, they're seeing little tiny little hands and feet. It's traumatizing. So what happens is they're coming for healing sooner. We're getting them here sooner than the surgical abortions, and it's because the trauma is greater because of what I just said.
What's even so incredible to me is, as humans, I think there's this innate belief in humans that killing is wrong, and yet they're justifying taking a baby just seconds away from being born and killing it in these late term abortions. And
oh yeah,
that isn't a human being. They just it's incredible to me.
Well, see, I mean, the problem, especially with the politicians, you know, the Democrats especially, they're the ones who I don't think there's an abortion they don't like, basically. And as you know, in the last election cycle, and even when we had so many Democrats running for president, that each and every one, they were climbing over each other to see who loved abortion more. And some of them were saying, oh yeah, it should be legal up till birth. Like, what? And yet people voted for people who would say these words. It just shows you, like, what has happened to the conscience of America. You're willing, and you know what it is, Ryan? Nowadays, these ultrasound pictures are sharper and sharper, and the parents get them earlier and earlier. I mean, people put these pictures in frames on their desk. They're the first pictures to go into a baby book now, right? Are there ultrasound, several ultrasound pictures of them? I mean, come on. You see the heart beating, you hear the heart beating. We have gotten so far off course because, you know what it is? We've become a disposable society when you think about it. And I know this is a crazy analogy, but when I was a kid growing up in Brooklyn in the 50s and early 60s, if your toaster or blender broke, or toaster oven, you brought it to the little repair shop that, you know, in town, right? There was a small bench, small appliance repairman, right? What do we do now? You throw it out and you buy a new one, right? We've become a very disposable society in the way we think. If something breaks, we don't fix it, we throw it out, we get a new one. Well, I don't want to be a parent right now. I throw the baby out, I'll get a new one. I mean, there are women, some women have told in their testimony, well, somehow I thought that if I got the abortion, my problem would be solved. And after all, I was just giving the child back to God. And then when I want to have a baby, he'll help me have another one. Again, the mentality of it's disposable, and I could go get another one when I'm ready. It's bad. It's very bad, you know?
And yet there is hope, you know. Rachel and I spoke with Father Pavone, and we talked about Norma McCorvey and her conversion story,
Oh yeah.
Bernard Nathanson and his conversion story. And you mentioned in your book even, and I'd known about the group but hadn't thought about it for years. You mentioned about the Centurions, the Society of Centurions.
Centurions, yeah.
Share with us what what that group is.
The Society of Centurions, this whole thing was founded by Dr. Philip Ney, a Canadian psychiatrist. And he worked extensively with abortionists all over the world who, after some of them doing 10, 20, 30, 40, like Dr. Nathanson, he supervised over 60,000 abortions, and one of which was his own child. But they eventually, many of them do come to regret their participation in abortion. And what the Society of Centurions does, it takes them through a healing process, which is different than like Rachel's Vineyard, where women and men, family members who participate in abortion go through healing. But for the person who did the killing themselves, an abortionist, and some of them will tell you this, well, the first abortion I did, it was a little difficult. But with each one, it became easier and easier to the point it was just so routine. Why? They dehumanize the baby to have that abortion. And in doing so, they begin to dehumanize themselves until usually they hit rock bottom, and then the scales fall from their eyes, So the Society of Centurions is where Dr. Ney has a program to take these abortionists through this process of now kind of grieving all those babies they've killed. And one of the exercises he has them do is to get a notebook. And he says, now, how many abortions, I want you to think about how many abortions you were responsible for. And they usually can come up with a number. They know it.
Yeah.
And he tells them, okay, today you're going to have baby one. And you're going to write number one. You're going to name that child, and you're going to write a letter of apology to that baby. And you're going to do this every day of your life until you've apologized and named all the children you destroyed. Because what the exercise is doing is putting humanity back onto those children and making them then grieve and accept their part in that baby's death. And so it's a whole process. And one of the steps he goes to is many of these abortionists, ill-gotten gains. They have beautiful, fancy cars. And he says to them, that was bought with blood money. You need to sell that Lamborghini or whatever the fancy car is. And now just get yourself a little Volkswagen Beetle or something. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, he takes them down a few notches of, you can't have all these fancy trappings because they were obtained through the death of these children. You have to live a more normal lifestyle now. And you've got to get rid of this stuff. And he would tell them, I don't care if you sell it and donate it to a pregnancy center, but you got to get rid of the ill-gotten gains from the death of these children. So it's a whole process, but it's amazing when they go through this process, the healing, the level of healing they have. I mean, Father Pavone has led some of these Society of Centurion retreats with Dr. Ney, and he's done some himself. Mm-hmm. And the level of healing, it's profound. It's very, very profound.
One thing I appreciate with the Silent No More is it enables women to talk about it and verbalize their pain and anger and be transparent in what they've done. Right. You were mentioning the Rachel's Vineyard for men and women. I'd always kind of just thought that was for the women. So they do go through men healing as well.
Yeah, in Rachel's Vineyard, first of all, they heal collectively in a group. It's not just one thing for men, one thing for women. I've actually facilitated a number of Rachel's Vineyard retreats, and I've done them where like we'll have maybe 12 people on the retreat. Maybe we have 8 women and 4 men all there together. And people say like, well, how did that work? With the, those men with the women. And very often the women no longer have a relationship with the guy they had that abortion with. And these men very often don't have a relationship anymore with the women that they, told to go have that abortion. So what happens here, there's an interesting dynamic because the guys, in part of their healing, they look at these women and say, we apologize on behalf of ourselves and other men and whoever hurt you for their part in abortion. So it's a healing moment, you know what I'm saying, for the women to have that, and even, when you talk about, when I was saying before about the doctors, with Silent No More, we started with just women. And then the following year, our first man came forward and he gave testimony. So the women, their signs say, I regret my abortion. The men say, I regret lost fatherhood. And then in 2015, we developed this whole shockwave concept because the people were coming to us anyway. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and Dr. Philip Ney had already established that, siblings that heard, grandparents, this and that. And so in 2015, when we had our big gathering in Washington, we had siblings there holding signs that say, I mourn my aborted sibling, and gave testimony. We even had Dr. Tony Levatino that said, I regret performing abortions. And he marched in that March for Life that year with the women who had their I regret signs. And the dynamic that happened when we got to the Supreme Court was, some women gave testimony, men gave testimony, siblings gave testimony. But then Dr. Levatino gave his testimony and his regret of all the babies he killed. And he looked at all these women and say, you probably don't even know or saw the doctor that did your abortion, but on half of them, I apologize to you for the damage and death of you, damage to you and the death of your child. And what happened was, after that event at the Supreme Court, we went back to the hotel and I had a room reserved, where we just had some hot soup and sandwiches. And Dr. Levatino came into that room with all the women. And some of the women were very apprehensive at first because they didn't know what was this going to be like to have an abortionist marching with us. Like, oh, but what you had to see what happened. They started asking him questions that were in their minds about their abortion. Wow. and their medical records that they had no access to anymore. And he was answering all their questions. He even gave them his personal email, his cell phone. And he said, anytime you want anything, you call me. So it was, I'm telling you, it was an amazing thing that happened there of healing for him, but for these women too. It was just amazing.
That's awesome. So who would men go to who had their sibling aborted? What group for healing would they go?
They can go to Rachel's Vineyard too. We've had siblings go on Rachel's Vineyard. Okay. We've actually had also too grandparents. We've had mother and daughters teams going. A mom who, and with the grandparents, there's two sides to the coin, just like with the fathers. Okay. Most of the dads, participate in the abortion and they said, yeah, you go get that abortion. But like I told you, there's a small percentage of them that wanted to stop the abortion and couldn't. Well, with the grandparents, some of these grandparents took their daughter for the abortion, but some of them, they had no idea their daughter had an abortion and they found out years later. Mm-hmm. And some of the most powerful moments are when the mother and daughter go together for healing together, as a combination. And there's one such story actually is very interesting. It's in Shockwaves. It's in the Shockwaves book. It's in the chapter on grandparents. And the girl who had the abortion, her name is Karen Reynoso. I mean, any people I say or stories I say is with full permission, by the way. And all the testimonies on our website that are there, they're for public consumption because the women sign a release before we put their story on the web or their video testimony. So they're agreeing for it to being there. So people are free to use these testimonies they want them quoted. They want you to help stop other people from going down that road. And they want you to reach out to people who are hurting to find healing like they did, But this one story, this girl had 3 abortions. All right. And her mother knew about them all. She actually took her for them. And her mother said, I thought I was helping my daughter. She did it out of just trying to help her out of this situation, And so this particular mom now, years later now, Karen later married had a couple living children. And so this grandma, she used to make for her living children little Christmas stockings, and she would hang them on her fireplace every Christmas, have to hang the stockings. After they went through the healing program together, she then also made stockings for Karen's 3 aborted children because during the healing program, they named the babies. And to this day, on her Christmas fireplace mantle, she hangs all the stockings, the living grandchildren and the ones who were aborted. And the the whole family knows. It's like the white elephant in the room. Well, now the truth is out of the closet. Everyone understands what happened. They all went through healing. And now they pray to those little babies and they acknowledge their lives, that they existed and were an important part of the family. And so Karen's 3 kids, who are a little bit older now, realize that they lost siblings to abortion. So it's very, very powerful when a family can get that kind of healing and then say, these are those babies' names and their lives did have meaning. And we're putting that meaning back in our family, that they existed, and we're going to acknowledge it. So it's pretty amazing, Brian, what happens, you know?
Awesome. Well, as you mentioned, Janet, that story and many more are in Shockwaves, Abortion's Wider Circle of Victims. You can get it at shockwavesthebook.com. If you'd like to have Janet come and speak at your conference, church, pro-life group, whatever, Janet, what website, how would they reach you? And
yeah, just go to priestforlife.org, and then there's information there how to invite myself, Father Pavone, Kevin Burke, Teresa Burke, any one of our speakers. There's information there how to fill out a form, and we'll get back in touch with you.
Sounds great. Well, Janet, I want to thank you for joining us today on Mercy Unbound. Keep up the great work. God continue to bless all of you over on the other coast of Florida. And, I hope to have you back soon. And people, you can watch this show and listen to the podcast at all the podcast platforms. And stay tuned. We'll have more great shows coming up. But God bless all of you. And thanks for watching. Thank you, Janet.
God bless. Thanks for having me on, Brian. God bless.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Brian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.